Hold on, Saad. Last time we talked,
right
we talked about you talked about things that you thought were miracles in the Quran. You talked about things that you thought were science in the Quran, and we bounced back and kind of gave examples to you of how that's not the case. Did you look into that, or did you just kind of skip over it?
I did look into it, but this time I thought I'd talk about something else because that conversation was interesting. But I guess why I don't want to get into it because it's what people would consider as my interpretation of what would be considered science in the Quran versus you saying that it's not, or which is why I think what makes more sense is because talk about is.
Saad, so are you saying that you were calling in with something that was not the reason why you were convinced before?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Sure. So if it doesn't matter so much that you can just skip on past it, then why did you bother us with it? Give us your best, man.
Oh, sure, I can do that.
Because that's not fair to us or to everybody watching. Like, this is not preaching time, right?
Sure, I'll do it. You asked for it.
Absolutely. Cosmic, I'm going to leave this over to you, buddy.
Ready.
All right, go for it.
Well, when I looked at some of the stuff about embryology and some of the other things that the Quran mentions were stuff that wasn't ever researched or ever understood at the time. My argument here is fine. What Matt said the last time was like there were people who had babies and there were miscarriages and all those things. That does make sense. However, but there was no particular book or there was no particular educational reference for people to look at. I mean, yes, people may have known about certain things, but there was no authority that says, okay, this is what it all boils down to.
Okay, you're referencing a conversation. Let's make sure that Cosmic and everybody else is on the same page. You were making the claim that it says in the Quran what an aborted fetus looks like, and people could not have known what aborted fetuses looked like. Therefore, the Quran is true and contains scientific information. Is that about right?
It was something that's what we were talking about. So that was what Matt's argument was the time that.
No, that was his response to your argument. So, are you still working on that, or is that something that?
Well, I'm kind of working on it. My response to this when I thought about it, I was like, there's no specific authority that suggests that at the time suggested that this is embryology or any certain book. For example, like even today. There's a lot of things I know, a lot of things you know, but in order to trust something, trust a certain fact, you need to go to an educational book or a professor or a PhD or someone who's an expert at certain things.
Right, but it's not advanced embryology to know what an aborted fetus looks like. I mean, all you need to do is look at it. I mean, I would understand if there was something more significant in there. If the Quran had some information that cannot have another explanation for its origins and how the authors of the Quran, whoever it may have been, could have known those things, then that it was divinely inspired or indeed the direct revelation of God, then you might have a point. But it seems to me that you're pointing to something that can have a vast array of explanations, and the simplest of which is that, yes, it's perfectly possible to know what these things look like. I don't really understand that argument. A thing to note is that many of the supposed miracles and the scientific miracles, which, as they're often categorized in the Quran, are broad enough that they can be taken in multiple directions. So, for instance, a lot of people point to where in the Quran it says that the sun moves in its own orbit, and they say, look, there's no way that we could have known that the sun is actually moving through a galaxy as well as being our own solar system. They say it wasn't until the 20th century that Hubble found out that there was more than just our own galaxy. Well, the fact of the matter is, the sun moving in its orbit could just as easily mean the sun orbiting the Earth as the sun orbiting the galaxy. And I think I know which is more likely. And in all the cases where the Quran seems to have some kind of prescience when it comes to scientific issues, it's almost certainly exactly the same kind of situation whereby there's a perfectly more simple naturalistic explanation for this that doesn't require the extra baggage of believing that it's the divine word of God.
That's where I was suggesting earlier that I could say I could infer from the Quran, or I could infer from certain texts that suggest that there is science in the Quran, and then you would argue that no, this is too broad, or it's interpreted to be in a certain way. But if you look at especially when you look at embryology, there's actual stages that are defined in the Quran about it. So it's just not like the example that we talked about earlier was about the chewed gum or the leech reference, and then that's where the argument took off from there.
Yeah.
That's what we discussed.
Okay, so you're obviously referencing a conversation that I didn't hear, but I have a question for you, if I can be so bold, which is this. If there were similar information in the Bible, would you turn into a Christian?
Well, in my opinion, see, now that's a very interesting question. The Quran references to the Christians and the Jews as the people of the book. In fact, being Muslim means one who submits to God. So basically, everyone who was a prophet, from Jesus to Moses to Abraham, all the Abrahamic prophets, all of them were submitted to God. So basically, in a sense, all of them were Muslims.
Yeah. So you're saying that the information there can be correct, but that's not sufficient. Although it's necessary, it's not sufficient to make you believe in the truth of the claims of the entire book, because although it may be true what's written in that book, there are other explanations as to how it came about being in that book. Well, precisely the same thing is true of the Quran. It may be the case that these things are genuinely true and are genuinely insightful scientific pieces of information, but there are a multitude of reasons why they could be in there, and they're also in other areas too that you wouldn't presumably find as compelling if the similar information was in a different holy book, or if we found an ancient manuscript that said a similar thing that didn't claim to be the divine inspired word of God. You wouldn't pick up that manuscript and say, well, this must have been written by the creator of the universe. You'd probably come to a different explanation. So it seems to me that rather than looking at the evidence in the holy book and using that to reason that the book is true, you're starting with the assumption that the book is true and then finding ways to justify that. Because if you started with the mere information in the book, there are a multitude of different explanations to why it's in there. And the fact that it's written by the creator of the universe is not the most compelling.
Well, that's a good question. So, but the thing is, at that point in time, which other book referenced to all of these would be, according to you, scientific facts, or wouldn't be scientific facts? Any of those things that are mentioned in the Quran that would be considered science, wouldn't be considered science. There was no real authority that would suggest these things.
Well, I'm not necessarily suggesting that there are. I'm just saying that if there were, I don't think that would convince you, would it?
Well, I'd like to know, because I myself, like all of you guys, am also searching for answers too. I'm not just going to blindly follow everything. In fact, and Eric and Jamie know that the two times that I've been on previously, I've always suggested that yes, I've been raised Muslim, I've grown up in a Muslim country, and I still believe in it. I've always had questions within the faith about certain things that preachers, so-called preachers, would teach me, and I had issues with them. And I tried to do my own research and try to come up with, try to look at more educated people within the faith and more knowledgeable people who would have answers, and then I'd find them my answers. So there's still a lot of unresolved mysteries of the universe that I feel I don't know. In fact,
that puts you with the rest of us. But why are you only looking within your faith to find just what confirms what you think is already true? Like you said, I'm looking for intelligent, scholarly people within the faith. Why? Why don't you just look for the answers? Shouldn't it matter? Should it matter? I mean, the truth is going to be the truth regardless of who tells you.
I have been. In fact, I've read books by non-Muslims. I don't know. Karen Armstrong is one of my favorite authors. She wrote the book History of God, which details the concept of God all the way all the way back to the Greek mythology, or whatever you want to call that, up till Islam. Everything all the way back from the pre-Abrahamic era to today. That was a very interesting book.
Even it's worth remembering that Karen Armstrong is quite sympathetic to Islamic doctrines, more sympathetic than other authors at least. So it's worth reading perhaps slightly more hostile authors, but I think it would do some good.
Yeah. Hey, Saad.
I'm more than willing to listen to different points of view.
Well, rock on.
I'm more than happy to write because it's important because I studied in the U.S., so I was around people who didn't believe what I believed, and then every time I'd get into an argument